everyone. One of the dua that Dr. Haifa covered was La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin. Why don't we take a moment to be able to recite the dua together? So I'd like to ask everyone to repeat after me. La ilaha illa anta subhanaka inni kuntu minal zalimin. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Sister Dalia Mogahed, who is a scholar at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding and is a former director of research, where she led the organization's pioneering research and thought leadership programs on American Muslims. She is also the former executive director at the Gallup Center for Muslim Studies, where she led the analysis of surveys of Muslim communities worldwide. She's the CEO of Mogahed Consulting. Her area of expertise is in public opinion, Islamophobia, Muslim women, and American Muslim demographics. Please give a warm welcome to Sister Dalia Mogahed.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My sisters, we are living in a time where we have an epidemic of despair. And this is not just figurative, this is literal. America is the richest country on earth. But did you know that year after year, our life expectancy on average is actually in decline? Despite the medical advancements and the technological innovations that this country is producing every year, its citizens are living shorter and shorter lives. And what is blamed for this almost paradoxical reality is what are called diseases of despair. Things like drug addiction, suicidality, and diseases that are the result of a lack of hope. So hope is what our society needs desperately. Diseases of despair have been studied, and what scientists are now saying is that the single strongest protector against diseases of despair is practicing faith on a daily basis. So it is not simply the belief in God, although that does help, but the single strongest protector against diseases of despair is a faith that is practiced daily. So very interesting that this characterizes one group much more than anyone else, where we have been gifted with a faith that demands daily and hourly practice. People are dying more of loneliness than they are of smoking. And it is not hard to understand why many, even of us, who have this beautiful faith in our hearts, can be a little low on hope. As Dr. Haifa just shared with us, the realities of the world can make us feel deeply sad, lacking a sense of justice, looking at brutality all around us, where we're literally witnessing a televised genocide and now a famine that is manufactured, where people are being killed not just by bombs, but by the lack of food and clean water in Gaza. And so we may wonder, How do we stay hopeful in the face of so much cruelty? How do we keep our hearts compassionate when we see so much harshness all around us? The first thing I want to share with you before I go into the Quranic strategies that I think will help us stay in this space of hope is to dispel a myth that some of us have internalized, whether consciously or subconsciously. And that myth is that hardship is a sign of Allah's wrath and displeasure with you. That if you are going through a hard time in your life, it's because Allah is angry with you and you are not fit for Allah's ease and mercy. This is absolutely wrong. And I'll go further to tell you a very interesting story that I became aware of from one of my teachers, Ustad Hassan Alwan. He shares a story of when Genghis Khan of the Mongols, if you are of course familiar, one of the most brutal conquerors the Muslims had ever seen. When he conquered Bukhara, he surprised the Muslims by being the speaker at the Jum'ah of that very week when he conquered. And he stood before the Muslims in the main mosque of Bukhara and told them, Muslims, you think that I am brutal and cruel? I am simply the wrath of your Lord punishing you for your sins. There is no way you can resist me because I am the wrath of God on you. He does not believe in Islam, but he was using this idea and this misunderstanding of our own theology against us as psychological warfare. And people heard that, and so many believed it that there was hardly a resistance to the Mongols in Bukhara, and they wiped out this region of the world. And sometimes some of us are using this same psychological warfare against each other and against ourselves. This is the rhetoric of our enemies, from the human to the jinn. And it's a very simple argument against this rhetoric. Rasulullah alayhi salatu wassalam, the most beloved of Allah, the greatest creation that has ever existed, that has ever walked the earth, was tested in ways that we can almost not imagine. He was orphaned before he was even born. He lost his father, never met him. He lost his mother at a very young age. Then he lost his grandfather who had taken him in. Before the age of 10, he had lost 3 major guardians in his life. He faced ridicule and rejection, starvation in a boycott, assassination attempts. He had to wage wars where he was deeply wounded and lost some of his closest companions. He buried every single one of his children except one. And he was the most beloved of Allah. So how can you then argue that your hardship is a sign of Allah's wrath or Allah's displeasure with you? But there's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. And what that means is that if we process our grief in the right way, usually including elements of faith, and meaning making meaning out of our grief and out of our hardship, that can result in our increasing our capacity for compassion. This is from a psychological perspective. And so great leaders in the world throughout history have been praised by their followers, and they've been praised by historians. But who has been praised by the Lord of the worlds, like Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, described as a mercy to all the worlds? So perhaps these hardships were part of a plan to cultivate a heart that had enough compassion for all the worlds. Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam. So never let anyone tell you that your hardships are your punishment because Allah is displeased with you. So how do we maintain hope in the face of both adversity and injustice? The first Quranic mindset that I want you to keep in your thinking is this idea that we have to focus on the Creator, not the calamity. So what do I mean by that? In the story in Surah Al-Baqarah, when right before Dawood alayhi salam was going to fight Goliath, Galut, the classic David and Goliath story of being out-resourced, outnumbered, a man being victorious over a giant. The story that comes right before that is one of a small brigade. And when you read about the background of this small brigade that was marching toward Goliath and his army, you find out that they were poorly resourced and poorly trained. And then they were told by their leader that they would cross a river, and anyone who drank from the river was not among them. And so this was a purification of their ranks. And after they crossed the river, most of them had failed the test. So a small group had then become an even smaller group. And some of those people who had crossed the river, now these were the believers who had crossed the river successfully, they said, we have no chance now against Goliath and his army. Why? Because they were focused on the calamity, the facts on the ground, the material reality, that they were outnumbered and now their numbers were even smaller. But there was another group among them who had a different perspective. They are described as those who knew they would meet their Lord. And what did they say? They say, how often does a small group overtake a large group with the permission of Allah? And indeed, Allah is with those who have patient perseverance, as-sabirun. So what do we learn from this story? We learn that the way to keep going in the face of what seem like insurmountable odds to everyone else who's looking is to focus on the Creator, not the calamity. Who is the creator of these circumstances? And who has the power to change them? The only difference between the ones who had the courage to keep going and the ones who felt overtaken by Goliath and his army is their perspective, is their intellectual horizon. Were they seeing a giant and his army, or were they focused on his creator? And therefore that giant was dwarfed in their eyes. So focus on the Creator, not the calamity, to stay hopeful. The second thing to keep in mind is that hardships are not only tests, they can also be protections. And the story of Al-Khidr and Musa alayhi salam is a perfect example of this, where Musa alayhi salam was watching the servant of Allah that is described as having been bestowed with rahmah and knowledge. So that is his characteristic. He had knowledge and he had compassion. And what was he doing? The first story, he was puncturing the boat of people who were poor and needed that boat for their livelihood. And Musa alayhi salam asked, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? It would be like us going out into the parking lot and watching someone, slash everyone's tires. What are you doing? This is how they make their living and they're barely scraping by. And then you come to find out that that calamity, which they must have experienced as a calamity, that their boat, which they need to live, has been damaged, and now they have to repair it, and it will take time and it will cost money. They experienced it as a calamity, but they didn't know it was a protection. It was a protection from a tyrant who spared the boat because it was damaged and didn't take them in and enslave them. A fate far worse than the small damage to their boat. How often have we experienced a damaged boat in our lives and thought it was a calamity when in fact it was protecting us from a fate that was far worse? How often did our car break down and we felt like, oh, now I'm late for my meeting, and you don't know the accident that you were spared from? How often did you have some kind of health scare that may have prevented you from a job that would have compromised your values? Realize that life is not just being done to you, it's being done for you. That all that Allah gives you is good. The third concept I want you to have in mind is that delays make dreams come true. Now, Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam went through a very difficult year. It's called the year of sorrow, where he lost the love of his life, Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, and his uncle, who was like a father figure to him and was the one politically protecting him from his adversaries in Mecca, within the Quraysh. And so to lose these two people within weeks of each other was an incredible calamity for him. And he went through a period of sorrow, the year of sorrow. And so during this year, Allah gave him some gifts that would ease his heart, that were balms for his heart. And one of those gifts was Surah Yusuf. Now, I went through my own year of sorrow, where within 13 months, I lost my father, I got divorced, and I lost my best friend to cancer. It was a very difficult year for me. And so I looked to the seerah to know what to do, and I knew that what I needed to do was study Surah Yusuf for my own healing, for my own balm for my heart, my own therapy. And within this study, which turned into a podcast, if you're interested, it's called Quran Conversations, where we discuss Surah Yusuf with my Quran teacher, Imam Muhammad Majid. Doing this was incredibly nourishing and healing for me. Within this study, I learned something amazing. I reflected on why there was such a delay to freeing Yusuf alayhi salam in prison, where the man that he told, remember me with your Lord, completely forgot. He was made to forget by shaitan. Of course, Allah is in control of all things. This was the plan. But when you really think about what that delay did, and this is a much longer discussion, I'm running out of time. What that delay produced was a couple of things. Number one, it gave the women of the city and the wife of the minister time for their conscience to ripen and be ready to confess. When you look at history, these kinds of confessions, of false accusations, come decades after. They don't happen right away. And had he left prison too early, they may have not been ready to confess, and he would have had this cloud of a scandal over his head. That's one. Two, this dream of the king and his ability to interpret it would not have happened right away, and he wouldn't have had the chance to interpret it free of scandal and therefore become the minister of finance of all of Egypt. And had he not become the minister of finance of all of Egypt, he would not have had his family members prostrating to him, as was foretold in his dream at the beginning of the surah. So delays make dreams come true. Don't ever think that a delay is not good for you. Sometimes your delays are exactly what you need so that your dreams can come true. And I'll end with this. Hope requires service. In Surah Al-Duha, where Rasulullah ﷺ was being comforted when he had a period of distress because he had not received revelation in many months and was being ridiculed and doubted by those around him. He was told one of the prescriptions of Surah Al-Duha is to help those who are in need. Staying hopeful requires that we reach for others, that we build community. One of the fastest ways out of a sense of despair is action in making someone else's life easier. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله. جزاكم الله خيرا.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Dalia. I fully related when you were speaking. SubhanAllah, you sometimes feel so helpless, especially with what's happening in Gaza and Sudan, with our Uyghur brothers and sisters, and even like the tragedies that we face in our own families. But truly, like, you know, the one thing that we can't lose is hope, as you said. So Jazakallah khair. Sister Dalia, she